Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today. Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
All right, welcome back to the Survival and Basic Badass Podcast, Kevin and Chuck. Today we're going to talk about overall preparedness. Part of that prepper series, one of the dangerous traps that, and I say dangerous, I don't know, traps that people fall into when they're starting their preparedness is they think very singularly. We just talked about, food storage, and they're like, yeah, I'm a prepper, so I have to have, 2 weeks of food, 6 months, year, whatever. But food is just one aspect of being prepared. Prepping is kind of like a lifestyle. And obviously, to each person, it's something different. We all prepare for something different. We all have different goals, different fears, different things that, that we're worried about and that maybe we should be worried about in our environment that might not be relevant to people in other environments. If I live at, on the side of a cliff and there's, the chance of a rock slide, me preparing and taking action for that is different than, and a legitimate fear and concern and more threatening than somebody who, isn't right there. So, or, hurricanes on the coast or whatever, especially if I live down in tropical islands, right? But to each of us, we all have different things we need to prepare for, but it's very easy to get too focused on one thing that we miss other categories that are huge. And like we kind of mentioned in the past, it doesn't have to be all about spending money. It can be organizing, planning, and thinking. So let's kind of, dig deep into it. I think the first thing is you might even want to grab a pen and paper and take notes. But the big thing is you may want to actually write out a plan for your preps. Kind of cover the big categories and actually spend some time brainstorming and think about what areas, are important to you and what's going to matter. And hopefully we spark some ideas and kind of get you in the right topic. But that's what I would say. So there's a lot of things that, needs that we need to meet just to exist. And obviously the biggest fear that I think preppers have and our biggest broad stroke is we're worried about the supply chain going away. We worry about whether it be for 2 days, whether it be for a week, whether it be for a shit hits the fan scenario where, the government collapses and they just don't have money to bring you shit. Honestly, it kind of happened to Puerto Rico, right? For a long time.
Yeah.
It happened in New Orleans for a long time. Puerto Rico, both of them actually were devastated for a long time and waiting to recover. And, having these things covered and prepared for is going to be, game changer. And, whether you're forced to run away or not. And, like in the case of Puerto Rico, they didn't really have a choice to run away. There was nowhere to evacuate to. New Orleans, they had some options at some point, but it definitely meant giving up all your shit if you did. Um, so anyway, moving right along. So big categories of, what you need to prepare for. So obviously, like we talked about, food, canning, all that kind of stuff, big deal. So long-term food storage, regular food storage, all different things we've covered, all different things you want to look into. There's a million books out there on how to, start to prep and get your food storage up to par. But there's so many other things. So I think next on the priority list is water, right? Food, water, shelter.
Hmm.
Let's move to water. So what kind of action could you be taking to, prepare water? So a lot of us are actually on city water, or even if you're out in the country, you may find that you have a well, but you need electricity to get that water out of the well. So, do you have an alternative to get the water out of the well? Do you have an alternative water supply? Like, what kind of options do we have? Do you have a way to treat water? Maybe you have a creek in the backyard, but you don't have a way to treat it. Who knows if people start, sewage backs up into the water. The creeks end up turning pretty ugly when all the pump houses and things shut down. I know Kevin's mentioned that in the past. And that stuff can really get, dicey, I guess. That water can turn bad. So you're going to need to have a plan. I know with me, I have a shallow well. And my plan, now right now, I technically can roll the lid off it and throw down buckets and pull up buckets of fresh, clean water. So not that worried about it for that. But I still have plans to throw a pitcher pump on there because how much easier would that make life and make it easier to, access that. But you need to think of ways that you're going to get the water out of the well. And even with a regular drilled well, there are ways to they have things on the internet of being able to drop down like a 2-liter soda bottle kind of thing with rocks in it and pull it up full of water kind of thing. There are ways to do it, but come up with a plan.
Right.
You need to find a way that you're going to do it, that's going to work, that you've tried, that is, actually going to function.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to water, one of the things that we should all remember is that most of us have bleach in our house. Most of us have bleach for cleaning, for laundry, all that sort of stuff. And you can use bleach to disinfect water from any stream, any lake, anywhere. It's usually about it's usually an eighth of a teaspoon for 2 gallons of water. But if your water is really dirty, if it's really gross, you're going to want to try and filter it out first, even if it just means pouring it through a t-shirt or something like that. Get the big chunks of shit out of there, and then add a little bit of bleach. You're going to have to give it some time, though. You're going to have to give the bleach a chance to do its job and disinfect things. So you're going to want to give it a good half hour before you actually start drinking that water. But having an alternate source of water and having gallons of clean water stored in your house is probably not a bad idea. Even if you just get the containers and fill it up from the sink when you have it, when you have water running, then you can have something set aside and ready to go. You're going to go through a lot more water than you think. Flushing the toilet, washing your hands, being cleaned in general, it's going to be a huge help to have water. Not just for drinking, but for all the other things that we use water for. So I think that's one of the things that I think is just as important, to have stored as food is. You're going to have a lot worse time rationing water than you are rationing food. So just keep that in mind when you're getting your preps together.
Yeah. A lot of people see the quick emergency water filters, things like even a really good one like Sawyer, or maybe a less desirable one like the Life Straw or something like that, something that you can use. But those are good for like a get home bag or like a situation like that. But that's not going to be the solution for your family for, long term at your house. Just because everybody has a Life Straw, you can't plan on 6 months of, everybody drinking out of the creek. It's not going to work.
Right.
You're not going to get that kind of longevity out of it. It's going to get you home on, a 5-day hiking trip, maybe. And again, I would prefer the Sawyer or something over the Life Straw. I actually had told you that they have those hand pump ones that are pretty cool. The more I look into almost every one, anybody who talks about a long time use with them, they're all kind of crappy. And I haven't found anybody who really makes one that is really worth a shit as far as the pumping stuff. So
Yeah.
anybody who has any ideas on those, definitely share it to the Facebook group or shoot us an email and we'll talk about it, because I haven't found the solution on that. But there are ways to filter water. Definitely you can make your own charcoal and gravel and sand and, stagger some layers to filter water through. There are ways to do it and do actually a pretty good job. It's just, again, that's something that's going to take printing out resources, time, and planning. Definitely something to consider. We did do, I think, 2 full episodes on getting water for your house and water storage. So if you want to know more about that and your options available to you, check back through. Next thing I think on the hierarchy of needs is shelter.
Right.
And shelter, a lot of us are planning on kind of bugging in and hunkering down kind of where we are. We've built our lives, like built up a homestead and kind of plan to, spend our lives in the place that we are at. And so maybe shelter is not the physical structure, that you need to worry about so much, but shelter is also heat and air conditioning. And, how am I going to be able to survive where I am? Now, obviously, we may not have the creature comforts of air conditioning in a, no electricity world, but you need to decide the environment you live in and what's reasonable and unreasonable and how you're going to solve those problems. Also, if your plan is to bug out, this is the time where you need to consider, what is my plan? How am I going to get there? Where are we going to go? Where am I going to take my family that there are going to be supplies, or how am I going to get my supplies there? If we're all going to stay at Aunt Judy's farm, that's great. But do we have supplies at Aunt Judy's farm, or are we just going to go overwhelm her? Are we going to be stuck with no clothes and no that fit us and no boots and no, all the things that matter?
Yeah, I think.
Are they staged there? Do we have a way to
this
get
is
them there?
a good time to talk about, having an evacuation plan. It's important, like Chuck said, you don't want to just show up, someplace with nothing to contribute and no supplies. And I know we talked about bug out bags and we talked about 72-hour get home bag. But it's also important that if you're evacuating, you're going to have certain things with you aside of that. You're going to have all your paperwork. Are you going to have your driver's license, birth certificates, all the information for your kids and for your family together? Do you have them? Do you know where they're at? Because that's an important thing to grab. If the hurricane's coming and your house is going to get flooded out, that's something you want to have in one location where you can grab it and go, and you're not going to be, running around looking for, your kid's social security card or something crazy like that.
Right. Especially if you're signing up for government benefits when you get where you're going.
That's right. When you end up in the
I
FEMA
know
camp.
A lot of you guys are ready to go to the FEMA camp and are, ready to sign up and say, "Dear government, I want to be your servant."
It's also important to have an evacuation route. You have a plan on how to get there. And,
Yes.
do you drive there the same way every time? Well, that's probably the best route. But if one of those roads is closed, or if something is blocking the way, you might have to find an alternate route to get where you're going. So it's important to have an idea of what roads you're going to be taking, which places are going to be the bottlenecks, like bridges and things like that. And just be aware of what obstacles you're going to have in between you and your destination. So I think
Knowing
having that
also
evacuation plan is a good idea.
and also knowing where gas stations are, when you make the trip, kind of chart it out. Hey, there's
Hmm.
a gas station at every exit, every mile. All right, no problem. But because you never know when things are tough and everybody's on the go and trying to get out of the city, then, gas can get wiped out pretty quick. And usually, if people are on the move, it might be because there's some kind of, transportation shortage where the fuel isn't getting delivered or something like that. These
Yeah.
don't have to be long term tragedies to still be a huge crisis as far as pain in the ass and getting your family to comfort and safety. And it sucks when you're the prepper guy and you spend all this money and time building up resources and studying and understanding, what could happen. And then the one event that happens, you totally fall flat on your face. Then your wife kind of turns on you. I'm just saying that could happen.
Yeah.
I'm just putting that out there.
Another thing to think about is having cash on hand, saving for an
Yes.
emergency. And if you have cash in your savings account and you've set it aside for a rainy day, just be aware that you need to get some of that cash out before the power's out. You need to have some cash available to fill up that gas tank on your way to Aunt Judy's house.
Right.
Having a little money set aside is will make a big difference in an emergency situation. So that's just something to keep in mind.
That sounds right to me. Yeah, I mean, realistically, I think, again, it depends on you and your lifestyle and who you are, your income, where you live. I mean, realistically, a good rule, you should have $1,000 cash set somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, again, if you're in a ridiculous city and the world's changing, maybe that number is $3,000. If you're in the small town country and whatever, and you're not really planning on going anywhere, maybe that number can be $500. It
Hmm.
just it depends, where you are, and obviously different countries it's completely different. But you know, you need to have a little cushion of access because when ATMs are down or whatever, or credit card machines are down, those last minute supplies could be a game changer. Um, like I said, because we plan for things, but you don't necessarily have everything planned. Um, there's always seems to be something that you're forgetting, and it gets brought to light at that moment. Or maybe even you rotate through your gas and that kind of stuff. I know I fill up I have a generator, has a huge like 20-gallon gas tank, and I fill that up with I use that non-ethanol fuel, and I fill it up, but I still every spring after the winter I end up draining it out and trying to run it through my lawnmowers and stuff, and
Hmm.
that way it doesn't sit in that tank for I'm just afraid that I'm going to end up going 3 years or something and it's not going to work and my gas is going to turn to crap, and
Right. Right. Wasted money,
so
wasted
right.
resources.
But so the point is there's always a time when you're like maybe turning over, like maybe you always have 5 gas cans that are always full and everything's great, but there's always a time when your supplies are going to be a little diminished, when you're working through the other couple that you use day to day or whatever, at the end of the rotation, whatever. So just
Hmm.
something to consider. Keep some cash on hand to be able to get whatever, even if you can buy, hey, I can go buy an extra 50-pound bag of rice because I know the apocalypse is coming tomorrow. Yeah, that would have been
Mm-hmm.
cool, and even if it's $100 at the store, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. So
Right.
just something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Now again, how are you going to heat your house? Do you have a fireplace, a wood stove? Do you have backup, heaters of some sort? Do you have a way to cook? Do you have something to cook outside? Um, if you're living the I'm going to be Grizzly Adams kind of long-term survival life is your plan, hey, I back up to 1,000-acre state land. I guess it would probably have to be more than 1,000 acres to really make a big difference. But maybe
Mm-hmm.
the 10,000 acres of state land behind my house, and I'm going to be hunter trapper and whatever. Do you have a smokehouse set up? Do you have a way to store the meat or preserve it long term? This kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. These are the things that you should start looking at to make you more self-reliant. Having because if you're able to bag 2 or 3 deer right in the beginning of a crisis, that's going to change how much food you have on hand. But obviously, if you don't have the freezers or anything to deal with it, having a smokehouse or something like that is going to be a game changer on you being able to store stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Something to consider. uh what else? What's the next category, Kevin?
Well, I want to touch on real quick on emergency drills, like doing some drills at your house. It's not something that you have to run through with your whole family every month or something like that. But having basic plan for basic emergencies, house fire, where are you guys going to meet? If everybody has to evacuate from a house and you end up jumping out the side window because you can't get down the hallway, um, where are you going to meet? Where are you going to make sure that your kids and everybody else is out of the house before things get too nasty? When it comes to hurricanes, floods, power outages, blizzards, any of that sort of stuff, it's good to have a basic plan on how you're gonna get your family together and how you're gonna take care of everybody. And everybody lives in a different part of the country. Everybody's got different emergencies they have to worry about. I'm in upstate New York. I don't worry too much about volcanoes and tornadoes, but blizzards and power outages, they're not uncommon in this area. So that's the kind of things I plan for. If you live in Miami, your plans are completely different than mine. But you want to have a basic test run. Make sure that you're covering all your bases when things get hairy. I think it's
I
I
like
think
it.
it's important when you have small children, or you have say one of my kids lives a few miles from my house. Not a big deal. I could even walk there if I have to. But having a plan to either get them to me or me get to them is important. It's an important thing to have in mind. So keep that in mind when you're getting ready for emergency drills and things like that.
You might have kids away at college. You might have the crazy daughter that wants to move to New Jersey for some ridiculous reason. These things are possibilities. And then you're like, hey, how do I get that kid home? Well, obviously, if they're in New Jersey, it's a lost cause and just forget it. I mean,
Yeah.
they're on their own and whatever. But I'm just saying, hypothetically, there might be a kid that you want to go retrieve. Then you need to have a plan. And the thing is, if your plan is, hey, somebody's really far away, honestly, realistically, after the shit hits the fan kind of thing, you're not going and getting that kid, or, or you're leaving what you have to go be there. There's not
Right.
it's not realistic to travel in a time like that. But what that means is you need to start paying attention to what's going on in the world. You need to
Mm-hmm.
keep your family close and pay attention to the signs so that you're ahead of the game. Um, you know, obviously it's impossible to predict, random scenarios, terrorist attacks, things like that. But, you need to do the best you can to kind of pay attention to the tensions going on in the world and like that. Next, I would say first aid. You guys need to have some kind of first aid plan. One, equipment for basics first aid, but do you have a more long-term, more sustainable medical kind of plan? Do you have things like antibiotics, stuff like that? I know we've mentioned it. We've preached that more and more. There's books that we plug that are really going to be helpful and be able to get you through it. Or do you know somebody who's local, who's, hey, this guy's the nurse, this guy's whatever. But like I had mentioned, just last week, you need to talk to each other. You need to have a plan. You need to work that in. And maybe you need to get some training. And moving right along, training is huge. Learning life skills. And now here's the thing. It doesn't even mean you have to go to classes or whatever, although classes usually are helpful because usually when you go away to a class, you're getting the hands-on. You're actually seeing how it's done. Usually if somebody sets up a class, they are a subject matter expert, that kind of thing. So that, makes a big difference. But try and can and preserve some stuff, at your house. Try and, set up a smoker and actually smoke something a couple times. See how it works. See how long it lasts. I know one of the things I see from my wife's flower farming business, she'll take different flowers and she even, like, because of the humidity in our house, like our house is actually pretty dry. And other people around here a lot have very, humid areas. She'll have people take flowers and put them in their house and have them take a picture of it a week later and send the picture back. And, hey, which ones lasted? Which ones, whatever. So you know what works where. And you can really kind of get the most out of stuff. And my point is not that you can grow flowers and get them to work out right. My point is try different things in your environment, with your store, with your storage area. Hey, if I put all my stores in the basement, is that mold problem that I've been fighting down there going to be an issue? Or, the high humidity in my basement going to be an issue? Is it where I live that it rains 24/7 and getting firewood is a bigger problem for me? We need to kind of implement some of these things so we can find out how it's going to work for us. We keep going back to gardens and stuff. What's a big problem in my area? Now, we have mentioned that from year to year, the problems will change. One year you'll get an infestation of bugs that you never had before. One year the rabbits will be a big problem that they weren't before. Or, something like that. Things do change and we adapt and whatever. But the more you put these things into practice, you can kind of realize what obstacles you're facing and what kind of steps you can take to prevent it. Thinking you have a good water supply and having that dry up, do you have an alternative? But these are the things, when you actually put it into practice and try it, you realize, hey, all right, cool, I wanted to garden, but now that it's the apocalypse, all of a sudden I don't have water for my garden to the level that I thought I did. These kind of things matter, but it's by putting it into practice that we can actually do it. Kevin always goes hiking and camping and testing out his gear. He's used to cooking off grid and doing that. But try a week of cooking over a fire in the yard, or, even if you can do it one night a week, 1 week you do, breakfast in the backyard. Next day, dinner, whatever. I mean, probably those 2 meals kind of cover everything. But if you do that a few times, you realize, hey, I can do this meal real easy. This recipe works. People who save food and that kind of thing, try the different meals. Actually try it and see, hey, is this something my family's going to eat? Or, hey, I didn't even realize I'm allergic to half this stuff or whatever. know what problems are going to present. And that's kind of the reason we go through these steps. This is why you want to go through your, plans. Security. I doubt that's something that people miss, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably heard us preach 100 times about having some reasonable weapons and maybe carrying a handgun or that kind of thing. Those things, but you need a plan for that. And having 8 bullets and a handgun, maybe you're a little light in that area. Maybe you need to step it up. I mean, that's better than not having anything. I'll agree with that. But you might want to step up your game a little bit. Bullets are starting to come back down to reasonable prices. Just think about it.
Yeah. With that, I want to hit on real quick, just when you're assessing your preps, do a basic overview of your house and your security, your home security. Do all your locks work good? Do you have that one door that always sticks and doesn't ever lock right? Maybe address that. Having a safe home, if you're planning on bugging in, is really important. Fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. I know a couple of people got in a bad situation down in Texas last year when they had that big snowstorm because they didn't really know how to heat their home because it wasn't something that came up that often. And some people died of carbon monoxide poisoning from doing stupid things. You can't just move your grill into your house and turn it on and expect that there's not going to be an issue with a fire or something like that. Having alternate ways to heat your home without poisoning your whole family is probably a good idea. But having those things like smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, having those things around your house is a big step in making sure that you're going to be safe for a long-term survival situation where you're stuck at home. So, and on top of that, make a plan with your neighbors, know who lives around you, find that old person that's lived in the community for 20 years because they're going to have a lot of information that you might not have access to. They're going to have, they're going to remember historically what things were problems and what things were really non-issues. Now I'm the old person and I'm still a dumbass. So, take it for what you will, but, be aware of who's living around you. I know that there's some people in my community that would rob my house if I gave them a chance to. There's
Kevin,
also neighbors
that
I know.
person in your community?
Well, there's also people I know that would, that if they saw somebody breaking in my house, they'd go over and figure out, what the fuck is going on. It's you have different types of people. We call those people nosy Nellies. Yeah, the Karen next door. They're not always bad. Well, most of the time they're bad, but know who lives around you and what you can expect from those types of people. That's all I'm saying. When you're making a plan for making your house safer and your area safer, check on Megan's Law. See if there's like a person living up the street that wants to snatch your daughter or snatch your kids up. Be aware of the assholes that live around you, but also be aware of the people around you that that are capable and competent people.
No, we were just discussing at the farmer's market. They're like, "Oh yeah, that lady by you just died of a heroin overdose," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's shit. Great." Thanks. But I guess that happens everywhere, huh?
I guess so.
I don't know. It's an ugly world. But yeah, think of try and think outside the box. Things that are going to come up. Things where you fall short. Think of your travel plans. Think, just think bigger than just food and security, Think of how you're going to maintain your lifestyle. Think about the gardening tools, all the different stuff. We tried to hit all these topics, in depth. I know we did an episode on actually fighting fires on the homestead. how to kind of prepare and clean up your property so that, it's a little more fire resistant, even though I know that it's illegal in like the California or something to try not to burn down your house or something. You have to let those wildfires go. I don't know. Like you're not allowed to clear any kind of land or anything like that. That's not, whatever. Just don't come up with a plan. That's what I would say. That's why we prepare. That's the whole prepper mentality, is coming up with a plan that you need to be ready for whatever comes up.
Yeah. Now, one thing I want to hit on before we wrap up for the day is updating your supplies. Chuck's dog acting crazy. One thing you got to do is when you're looking over your stuff, just go through, look at expiration dates, check your stuff that you've been stocking up on. Nothing's worse than opening up that bucket of rice and finding a mouse got in there and shat all over it. You got to pick out the little rice turds that are the same for shape.
You. Yeah.
Yeah. Check the dates, best by dates on your canned food. Rotate your supplies so that you're using up stuff before it goes bad. And just do a basic checklist. The stuff that you have, the stuff that you need to get. That sort of thing. Make the shopping list and add a couple of things on there that that might help you out in a certain situation. Whether it's water, whether it's clothes, warm clothes, whether it's food, whatever it is. Keep updating your supplies and make sure that you're not, just throwing money away.
Right. No, that's definitely, you'll find when you go back and inventory your stuff, if you're like me and you just keep picking up things, I'm at Sam's Club or whatever, I'm going to, a good prepper should have lots of Bisquick or whatever. And then you go through and realize you have, 8 boxes of that on the shelf, but you don't have any, tomato sauce or whatever. But going through and inventorying, believe it or not, when we got talking about this at home, the wife and I just went through all the shelves and cabinets, and we wrote down a list and wrote down, hey, we're weak on this. We actually went through and updated, and we checked dates and threw some things out. Not much, though. I got to say we did good on not having to throw away stuff, but we did see things that, hey, we're falling short in this area, and the areas that we could definitely improve. And actually, I'm heading out to the store from here to go kind of replenish some, more supplies and whatever. One of the things I bought was bleach. I know Sam's Club now has these where you buy 3 gallons of bleach concentrate. So it's supposed to be 135 containers. It's basically the same thing as if you went and bought one of those 5-gallon pool bleach, containers where it's concentrated like that, the chlorine, that kind of thing. And, you guys should realize that's, one of the things we talked about in the water treatment storage episodes was, that pool bleach, pool chlorine that you can buy, is really concentrated. And if you can figure that out, that can go a long way as opposed to buying 3 or 4 gallon jugs of bleach,
Right.
If you do store bleach, you want to keep it in a cool, dark place. That's going to kind of hopefully prolong the life of it a little bit.
Right.
But even so, nothing lasts forever. But if you keep it out of the sun, you do pretty good.
Yeah.
So something to be aware of.
Yeah. Now, when you're buying bleach, just be aware, they sell that fucking country fresh scented and
don't buy scented.
Yeah. That's not going to be something. I mean, it's fine to drink, but shit, you don't want to be fucking tasting tropical breeze when you're drinking your water,
Yeah, that's not the dream. It'll smell nice, but the taste might lead you in a different direction. So
that's right. Just because
just saying,
shampoo smells like strawberry doesn't mean it tastes like strawberry. I learned that from experience.
Experience, yeah. again, make sure you got the gear that you need, the axes, the tools, the cooking tools, for cooking over a fire, having some grill grates. I mean, obviously in a pinch, you can kind of build anything. And that's why it's kind of neat watching the videos of what people do on YouTube and that kind of stuff. Because you get ideas of how people repurpose stuff and how they make stuff into a useful tool. There's nothing wrong with grabbing your oven racks and taking them outside and throwing them over a fire to use for your cooking. This works, but if you have ideas, you might realize you have resources there that you didn't even know. There are a lot of people who, have resources available to them and just don't understand how to get or utilize them and can really fall short. So spend a little time, do the research. If you have ideas of things you can turn your kind of other people's junk into useful prepping tools, maybe share them on the Facebook group. We'd appreciate seeing it. And you have any ideas, you can email us at preppingbadass@gmail.com. Otherwise, stay safe, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
The Survival and Basic Badass Podcast is a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today. Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.